Welcome to Conversations Different, a podcast from the Santa Fe New Mexican featuring the interesting people, places, and issues of northern New Mexico. This is Inez Russell Gomez, your host, and today we are speaking to Duke Rodriguez, CEO of Ultra Health, licensed marijuana provider, and a driving force behind the movement to legalize cannabis in New Mexico. Welcome, Duke.
Thank you, Inez. It's good to be here.
We were talking before we started that it's been a while, and I'm thinking, cannabis got legalized in June of 2021 for recreational use. How is it going?
So we got legalized in 21. Our first day, very appropriately, was April Fool's Day 2022. We're approaching our third full complete year, and basically the world has been turned upside down. Imagine that we started off prior to the legalization, we had 35 licensees. And I could, gather them all in a room about the size of your office here. And now we have over 3,000 licensees.
So unlike liquor, where liquor licenses were always precious and handed over with much aplomb, cannabis licensing has been more open.
Open would be actually very kind. It has been more than open. It has been better than Oprah's TV show. Everybody gets a license. You simply mark the boxes, attest that you're going to promise to someday do good deeds, and you get a ticket.
Wow. So I think I read something you wrote recently that said the pie's not getting bigger and everybody's slice is getting smaller.
Absolutely. There is no growth in the program anymore. I tell people that the bloom is off the flower. We are now at a point that the sales are flat. I think last week the Cannabis Control Group testified as they described it as stagnant. So I think that's a fair word. If the green rush is officially dead.
Unless, another thing I think you said, unless you live 15 miles from the Texas border.
The only growth we're seeing is if you happen to be in southeastern New Mexico or just outside the doorsteps of El Paso, Texas.
Wow. I was driving to a funeral in Lubbock, and I could not believe how many cannabis stores. I mean, if they could have had one right on the railroad tracks before you get into Texas, there would have been a store right there.
Inez, imagine Sunland Park, a town with a population of 17,000 people, and they've got 27 dispensaries.
No. Although I was thinking maybe the Texans aren't driving to Trinidad anymore, as opposed to coming here.
Yeah, up in that corner of New Mexico, we certainly are able to pull them off before they get to Trinidad. But honestly, if you compare that opportunity to El Paso, the Texas opportunity is much, much larger.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in this session, are they doing any legislation to address this oversaturation of the market or doing anything that will... I mean, you don't want to go out and advertise to get more people smoking weed necessarily or using products, even if it's for pain and those kinds of things. But what can you do or what can be done to protect this industry, which had so much hope?
I think that any thoughts about helping to mitigate, slow down, do whatever you can to slow down the licensing, that's not on the table. That's not even being considered. I think what's being considered this session is it possible to stuff the genie back in the bottle? Meaning we have so many competitors. We're more concerned about other folks who were invited to the party that we did not anticipate, primarily the illicit market.
Which is still pretty strong.
It is probably stronger than it's ever been. And I would argue that the illicit market probably peels aside maybe 25, 35% of the overall market.
Wow. Do you think the taxes are too high? Is that the reason? Or is it they like the variety of marijuana that is being grown illicitly? Or what is it?
I don't think it's product selection. I think it's pricing. We're obviously number one state in poverty, so every dollar matters. As you see the price of eggs go up and gasoline and rent, you've got to be very judicious of where you spend your money. And no matter how you slice it, the illicit market can price it better. The quality will not be there. The risk is there, and it's probably unsafe. But when you can save probably 22 to 25%, that's a big number.
No, that's true. It's just one of the things that I think is providential about having legal cannabis is that when you go to a store and buy it, you know you're not getting fentanyl. And when you're buying it on the street, you don't know what you're getting.
I think it is always safer, wiser, It's good for New Mexico. It's good for industry. It's good for safety to buy it from a legitimate licensed dispensary. Now, even if there's so many, it's okay. But the reality is that we are so poverty-driven. We have so competitive market already that the illicit black market, your homie, your friend down the street, can probably get you a better deal. And sometimes that differential is enough for people to take the risk.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And until you start arresting those people or maybe busting the supply chains, or even if it's an illicit grow, until you actually enforce the law, you're not going to have those people as legitimate customers.
And not only is it those, you almost feel like there's this dark market out there. It's not just that. I've gone to on Central Boulevard in Albuquerque in a vacant building. There's 60 vendors on a Friday night in broad daylight. And this local police understand it, recognize it, and don't care. In Estancia, you may have heard the story that there were Chinese organized crime out there growing 200, 300, 400,000 plants. It's not just that. And then, by the way, right down the street from here, you can find a gas station. And you can buy these what's called hemp-derived products. And I will tell you, this is sad, those products are every bit as powerful, as potent as any other cannabis product. Ooh. That should scare you.
That is, because then you're not sure that they're measured correctly or the potency, all of those things. Because, I mean, one of the promises of legal cannabis is that it would be safer for people to consume.
We took products off the shelf because we wanted to test it. And I can tell you, we all know the name Larry Barker. He himself took products off the shelf, and he experienced the same thing we did. I would say that 90 to almost 100% of those products have contaminants, have pesticides, and have potency levels way above what the law allows.
So if you don't want to advertise, everyone, hey, smoke weed, it'll bring in taxes, could there be an advertising campaign to really highlight the dangers that maybe people don't recognize are there?
I think it's great to communicate, to educate, and get people to understand the risk that they take. I think it would be a better effort if we just eliminated that entire illicit market. That's the real problem, because they seem to be like whack-a-mole. As soon as we take one down, two others will appear. So the education will only take us so far. At some point, we have to just stand up and say, law enforcement, state government, the regulator will not tolerate them any further.
And then people do raids and arrest them and take them up and just start going after them.
For the first time, so we've been complaining since the day of legalization, for the first time, FBI, DEA, state police raided a facility in Estancia, and they made actual arrests and confiscated something like 65,000 pounds of illicit drugs, primarily weed.
Wow, that's crazy. That was like what was happening out in Navajo land, where they were growing hemp, but it really was a cover for a marijuana farm.
Because hemp and cannabis sativa are, in fact, the same plant.
Yes.
The only thing that distinguishes it the level of THC. So you can grow it and just wink and nod and say, it's hemp. But in fact, it's illicit cannabis.
Wow. On that note, we'll take a quick break, and we'll be back in a moment with more Conversations Different.
If you're thinking about a home improvement project, HomeWise can help with an affordable fixed-rate home improvement loan. Investing in your home with energy-efficient upgrades and water-conserving features is always a good idea. You can keep your home comfortable year-round, save money on your utility bills, and reduce your carbon footprint. We can provide the financing you need to go solar, replace your old drafty windows, update your heating cooling system, install a new tankless water heater, repair or replace your roof, and more. Get started on your home improvement project today. Call 505-983-9473 or visit us at homewise.org. Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 188231.
We are back with Conversations Different, talking to Duke Rodriguez about the state of the cannabis industry and maybe a few other things. One of the things that seems unfortunate is so many times we hear, well, we can't do anything about it. We can't do anything about it. If, anyone in Santa Fe who drives by some of the shelters that take care of unhoused people, There's open drug use in the streets. They're selling drugs to the people. I mean, there's people preying on folks who are using the shelter, but we can't do anything about it. And the same with what you were talking about with, people growing cannabis illegally. Why can't we do anything about it?
Well, I think we can do something about it, but it's exactly as you said. I routinely drive around Albuquerque, and I saw how quickly it decayed.
Yeah.
I mean, you would see homeless people everywhere. And I have so many friends who are in Santa Fe, and they would say, but, thank God it's in Albuquerque, not Santa Fe. Come on, you can drive right down the street in Santa Fe. It's the same problem. Maybe not yet at the same magnitude, but going to be the same exact problem in Las Cruces, in every other community. It's that law enforcement no longer believes it's a priority. But I also, not to point a finger, but that's also points to the leadership within the state. If the state doesn't say this is important, then nothing will happen. Otherwise, it'll be like a comic series. We will turn over our cities to the criminals like Gotham City in a Batman series. That's what we are becoming. It doesn't have to be that way, but I think that's the reality of what we face today.
How do you keep your industry healthy? And, obviously people want to make a profit if they become a retailer or, they're packaging cannabis plants or making food with cannabis. How do people survive in this environment?
Well, I do think, unfortunately, because we opened up licensing so broadly, we are part of the problem. And that's a hard thing to admit. We are part of the problem because cannabis isn't like a donut shop. It isn't like a grocery store or a hamburger shop. If the donut shop stops selling donuts, it closes down. In cannabis, it doesn't work like that. If all of a sudden your legitimate operation is having difficulty, you still got to pay your rent. You still got to pay your employees. But maybe this month I don't pay the cannabis excise tax. Maybe next month I don't pay the gross receipts tax. Maybe next month I continue to operate under the table, and maybe the sales aren't on the books. Maybe I sell weed out the back door. Maybe I sell mushrooms under the table. Maybe I offer fentanyl. So cannabis sometimes becomes not only a hope in New Mexico, but it may also become a seed of its own destruction. So there's a challenge here. Without enforcement, the problems will only get worse.
Now, one of the pieces of legislation being discussed is an enforcement piece. Is that something that could help?
I think that's a piece of the puzzle. I don't think that's a big piece. Actually, if you ask, they said, Duke, how do you feel about enforcement and a special, what they're calling a task force of 6 to 8 law enforcement, like police powers, they're calling it. I don't think it makes a difference. I think it'll take them a year and a half, 2 years to get up to speed. They'll spend a lot of money trying to duplicate what law enforcement should be doing anyway. If we can commit the money to enforcement, give it to those who are supposed to do it. Give it to law enforcement, make it a requirement, enforce the current laws, don't need to write new ones.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you say is let the police do their jobs and give them the resources that they need to do that.
Exactly, 100%.
Okay, that's an interesting point because, again, there's so many times with traffic stops, no one in Santa Fe allegedly gets a speeding ticket anymore. That's what we feel like, because if you drive the streets, everyone's going crazy. We don't have the resources. We don't have the people. So this would kind of raise expectations.
We have the budget. We have the monies. We just need to direct them better. Put the monies to the enforcement issues. They will pay for itself. It'll give dividends back, and people will feel safer, and law will be reestablished. Right now, it's, everybody just says, you know what? We have problems like every other community. I've heard the mayor say, oh, we're like Fresno. Look at Fresno. Well, I don't care about Fresno. I care about what's happening here in New Mexico. So it's an issue of expectations and people being held accountable, and we're not doing that anymore.
No, that makes sense. I know when I lived in Albuquerque, it was the 90s, and that was when people thought every other house was a meth house or things like that. And I remember my neighbors got a petition because they thought there was a house down the street. And I think actually they were just maybe trading favors because the cars came and went, but there was no funny smells or anything. And I didn't sign the petition because I just thought we didn't really know what was going on. But I know I always felt unsafe. And I think it is worse now, but to me, that's how Albuquerque always felt, was like it was a big city with big problems, even though it was wonderful in a lot of other ways.
Imagine this, Inez. We at our peak, and we're not at our peak anymore, Ultra Health operated 35 dispensaries. In the last 18 months, we've closed 7. And you know why? The reason why is we've had a break-in practically every single month at one of our locations. Every month I get a call at 2 or 3 in the morning. We were broken in Roswell. We were broken in Albuquerque. We were broken in twice in Santa Fe in the last 12 months.
Oh, wow.
So it's not just a Albuquerque problem.
No.
And they catch them on a freezing, snowy storm on the roof. They're just being more aggressive. But also, in every break-in, in every event, never has anyone been prosecuted. Not once.
So people are breaking the law, harming your business, costing you money, all of the things, losing jobs because people, if you close the shop, that person doesn't have a job, and no one is being prosecuted.
No one's ever been prosecuted. And sometimes all we get is we hear the alarms, we hope police will show up. In many cases, either they don't show up or they show up hours after the alarm has been turned off.
Wow. You're a powerful person. You're the CEO of a large company. You know the governor by name, probably, the speaker, all of those people. How do you improve the service you're getting from law enforcement or from municipal services?
You know, it used to be that we could easily call them up and speak one-on-one. But now there are so many other priorities, violent crime, fentanyl, auto theft, that I think we're actually a low priority. So I hate to say this, but part of our effort now is talking to you, talking to others, putting editorials out there, making sure that we raise the flag and make people very aware. This is not just a slight problem. This is approaching a crisis, epidemic level of crime. And if you don't do something, we might as well just admit we've given up on our communities. I think that's been the best approach, is just to get the noise level out there loud enough that forces them either to do something or they don't keep their office any further.
Right. I think that's been an issue in that when someone runs for re-election, let's say, and the citizens don't feel like their crime worries have been taken seriously, half the time the person running against them is such a doofus that you're stuck with the person in office.
The lesser of two evils, of course.
Yeah. And it's a huge gap. And a lot of the times the people who are talking about crime speak in sound bites and, lock them up, throw the key away. And you don't feel like that's going to help either because they never talk about funding the jails and adding jail trustees and making sure that, people at the Bernalillo County Detention Center can use the bathroom without a mess, because that place is a wreck, or has been. Maybe it's been fixed since I last wrote about it. So, how do you deal with the whole system?
I think in New Mexico particularly, you're going to see finally the tipping point. We saw it at the national level. No matter how people for or against how the presidential election went, they saw a change. In New Mexico, you're going to see the same thing. I'm hearing a lot of names of who are going to run as R's, who are going to run as D's, and I think the number one thing is they don't want political rhetoric. You no longer get to talk about, I'm tough on education, I'm going to fight for more this or that. I think they're going to say, prove it to me. And if they don't, I think those who have made a career out of running for office are at great risk. So I think you're about ready to see that go the other way.
That makes sense. Although, as a result of the tipping point, we now have college dropouts with our Social Security numbers. It's an interesting time to be alive. And I want to live in boring times, before I die.
I'm with you 100% because every day you pick up the paper and you say, all our data is in this group now. And you really start to wonder if we're watching some bizarre Matrix kind of world, because these things shouldn't happen, couldn't happen, and wouldn't normally happen, we believe, in our lifetime.
No, and here we are. And on that note, we'll take a quick break and be back again with more Conversations Different.
This is Patrick Dorsey, publisher of the Santa Fe New Mexican. Looking to reach a wider audience and grow your business? For 175 years, the Santa Fe New Mexican has been the trusted voice of Santa Fe, with unmatched local reach in print and online. In addition to our long-standing, independent, family-owned newspaper, we have a full-fledged marketing team with the expertise to help you succeed in the 21st century. From traditional print to precision-targeted digital advertising, we have the tools to connect you with your ideal customers. Partner with us and see the results for yourself. Advertise with the Santa Fe New Mexican and unlock your business's full potential. Visit us at santafenewmexican.com/advertising or call us at 505-995-3852. Thank you.
We are back with Duke Rodriguez talking about the current state of the cannabis industry in New Mexico. And I want to go back kind of to the beginning, because before there was legal cannabis, of course, there was medical marijuana. But before that, there was a guy named Gary Johnson who became the governor, total outsider, won a really crowded pool for Republican nominee, came up against Bruce King and beat this beloved many-time governor of New Mexico in a huge upset. And you served in his cabinet.
That's correct.
And you was it Health?
Human Services, HSD.
HSD. Okay, you were Human Services. And one of the things that made him controversial and not a regular Republican is that Johnson was in favor of legalizing marijuana before it was cool. And everyone in his cabinet kind of got a lot of heat over that, as I recall.
That's correct.
Yeah. And what cracks me up is, remember, Darren White resigned.
Yes.
And what does Darren White, former Sheriff Darren White, do now?
Former Sheriff Darren White, for a while, owned a cannabis company.
That's right. So he's not in the business anymore.
You know, he sold his actually and made a little money off that. But that's the guy we all recall said, he did resign because Gary spoke of the legalization of cannabis.
Right. And because he was a former law enforcement
Correct.
guy, he thought that was a bridge too far. But that to me shows how far the conversation about marijuana and cannabis has come in our society.
But imagine this, and let's go back in time. Gary was the first in the country who advocated state legalization of cannabis, the very first. And instead, in 2014, Colorado did it versus New Mexico. Had New Mexico followed Gary's lead, I think you'd be seeing a completely different state of affairs today.
Right, because instead of doing it kind of at the tail end of several other states, it would have been first. He was very particular about how things were done, so perhaps there wouldn't have been quite as much widespread licensing. And instead of people driving through New Mexico from Texas and other states to get to Colorado, we would have been the destination.
We would have clearly been the great American dream. Instead, we have created the New Mexico nightmare.
How does that get fixed?
I think we have to do some basic things. You know, enforcement, yes. But I don't think you're aware that one of the worst things we did is we removed inspections. In every other state in the country, before you get your ticket, before you get your license, the state would come out and actually do a physical inspection, make sure your cameras work, make sure your point of service system works, that there's trace and track system works. You had an inspection before you got your ticket. We were in such a rush in New Mexico to get this system up, we threw it out the window. We are the only state in the country that doesn't have pre-inspection prior to licensure. And that's what got everybody into the system with no controls.
So my shop might not have safe standards in terms of how I package or anything like that. So you don't know as a consumer necessarily what you're getting.
You got your license. The city of Albuquerque, city of Santa Fe says you must be legit. They don't realize there was not an inspection prior to, and so there's no one looking over to, in fact, see that you are putting the systems in place and tracking that transaction and actually buying product from licensed operators instead of from the black market. Those protections are not in place, and it's happening every day. The state even licensed a place called Weed on Wheels without ever inspecting it. And there was literally someone who submitted an application with a van and said, and he called himself Weed on Wheels.
Well, we have food trucks. This is like the cannabis equivalent.
Yeah, Inez, he got a license.
Oh, man. That would be sort of like someone with gin in their bag going door to door.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can't do that. That's interesting. What I have heard complaints about is that so they don't inspect you beforehand, but the packaging is so ridiculous that it's an environmentally really messy industry because everything has to be individually done for whatever. And in terms of what you throw away just for a couple of ounces is kind of a big mess.
For your listeners to understand, imagine that, we don't require an inspection in advance, but on packaging, we have this checklist of 42 to 50 items that must be on that receipt. If you've ever gone to CVS or Walgreens and you print that off and it's like 3.5 feet long receipt, that's the mess we've created. And it's an environmental mess. I mean, the plastics that we produce, the paper we print, it's too many administrative red tape and not enough protection to make sure we don't stop the bad actors up front.
So we have the protections in the wrong place on the wrong things.
Perfect. Exactly.
Okay. So again, how do we fix this?
I think we have to go back and acknowledge the mistakes we made and admit to it and say, okay, let's just go ahead and say, because I heard the regulators said, and you probably recall this when we were first developing the program, you heard the comment, we're building the plane while we're flying it.
Yes, yes.
That was never a good idea. That plane will not fly. You don't build a plane while you're flying it. So we should have put in those protections on the front end, and we shouldn't have been caught up in all the little form in the back end. I mean, we wanted the window dressing to look good, and we wanted to hit that target date, and so we dropped all the safeguards. We just have to go back and put them back into place like successful states, including Colorado, have done.
So what happens in New Mexico if the industry stays stagnant? More people are going to go broke. Will the market kind of correct things?
I don't think the market will, in fact, hit that equilibrium in a very simple fashion. I think you're going to see more closed stores. You're going to see a lot of people lose their job, but that doesn't mean that the act of selling weed will stop. Those operators may move into the illicit market, and all we're going to do is take them out of the regulated market and move them into the unregulated market, untested, untaxed, basically the dark market.
So if you lose your job, let's say growing cannabis because the farm closes, you're not going to go get a job on an organic farm and grow tomatoes. Probably you might move into the illicit field, and the same with people who maybe work in stores or operate stores, perhaps.
Even more than that. That grow may not close down. That grow may not get a renewed license for cultivation under the state program, but it continues to grow. It continues to sell. It just doesn't sell into the regulated market.
Okay, so you've created these avenues for other ways of selling. Yeah, my son was taking controlled agriculture, and they did a field trip to Albuquerque to see a cannabis production. And being curious, because this is my job, I thought I'll just go with you. What 20-year-old doesn't want his mother on a field trip with him? But it was really interesting because this place is on 2nd Street behind these other warehouses, and there's like razor wire around it. And all of a sudden, you kind of get an idea that this is legal, but it's also still dangerous to some degree.
Very dangerous. And to the size, just give your listeners some concept. We love our green chili in New Mexico. We are proud. We lead the country in green chili production. The total value of green chili, 12 months long, is about 62 million. We do 62 million in weed sales in 1 month.
Wow. Talk about your priorities.
That's right.
Being messed up.
Messed up terribly.
Yeah, he was, those classes were fascinating because almost all the kids in them were there to learn to grow marijuana.
Yes.
Yeah, my son was interested at that point in growing food, and which is very hard. I mean, all of those things. Agriculture is hard, and pot cultivation is quite time-consuming and complicated. I don't think people even know how hard that is.
You eventually give up, and as much as people try to grow green chili at home, or watermelons or tomatoes, you eventually realize it's a lot easier, a lot safer, and probably better quality by going to someone who does it right.
That's right, and you don't waste as much water. We grew 2 chilies once, and oh my goodness, those are the most expensive chilies that ever existed.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's true. What do you think we do to get back on the right track?
I think the industry is beyond growing pains. It's now in the phase of saying, it's at a critical tipping point. And I mean, if I'm stumbling, it's because it's hard to admit that we have to make a decision whether we really want this to be a legitimate business. And if we do, are we going to put the enforcement behind to make it work? Are we going to stop trying to build this infrastructure within RLDCCD, which I think is just bureaucracy, and say, okay, we're going to take hard steps to only license operators who are legitimate? This open kumbaya system probably is not that effective. And then we need to be honest with ourselves. Public safety is important. People can't be getting products that are dangerous. And so we have to clamp all those areas back down, make them work again like they were promised, and let's start building the system ground up.
So in a perfect world, if I'm hearing right, regulation and licensing would be responsible for checking you out, making sure you're legitimate, issuing your license. The enforcement part in terms of stopping the dark side of it, arresting bad actors, would be done through law enforcement as they're supposed to be doing.
Yes, but we have different state agencies have kind of kept their hands off this entire industry. And RLDCCD wanted to grab the trophy and show the world, look at the great things we can do. I'd like to remind people that RLDCCD's primary role, RLD means Regulation Licensing Division. That's all their role should be, period. And we need to pull in resources from other areas. The Environment Department in New Mexico should determine that manufacturers are producing safe products and they're abiding by other manufacturing requirements. The Ag Department has to be pulled back into this. They should be inspecting hemp versus cannabis and making sure that these grows are operating within standards. And law enforcement needs to be regained back in there and say, this is your area, not CCD, not RLD. And don't forget TRD. The tax department needs to be brought back in and say, wait a minute, let's do some math. There are this many number of licensees. They're doing this much in sales. How come we're not getting gross receipts tax? How come we're not getting
Where's
CT?
our money?
So everybody's saying, hands off, CCD, RLD, wanted the trophy, wanted to be the driver in this. Well, they're not able to do it.
So to get this done, you're going to have to get people elected who then appoint other folks to change the system. So does that mean you're going to go into politics again, or are you going to get after it?
If you ever, that's interesting you said that, because actually I was asked that question several times today. I've always thought the dream job in New Mexico, if you love this state, would be to be governor. Mm-hmm. Would I run? I wouldn't say no, but I would say that we have a list growing of candidates who are finally saying they want to see this stop and to change.
And are you talking more on the Republican side, or?
I think it's going to be an interesting play, because on the Democrat side, I think most knowledgeable people will say that we have anointed a candidate who is clearly the front runner. Our former Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland, was likely to be the Democratic nominee. Democratic nominee. And I think she'll have a good challenge by Sam Bregman if he decides to jump in, but that will be a two-horse race possibly. But on the Republican side, you would be surprised by who's out there and looking at this one more time.
Well, I am surprised because what you said about the tipping point is so true. You don't know when people just get tired of whatever they think is the status quo and switch. And blue can turn red quickly in this media world that we're so fast-paced, you know.
I run around in these circles, obviously.
Right.
And I've known most of these characters over many, many years, 30-plus years. You'd be surprised. Former Governor Susana Martinez looking at another run. You got former Lieutenant Governor
John
Sanchez looking at a run. You got the mayor of Rio Rancho looking at a run. I've heard that the Honorable former Supreme Court Justice Nakamura.
Right, and she's the last Republican to win a statewide race.
Correct. So there is a slate of possible candidates out there that is growing. In the past race for U.S. Senator, Nella Domenici, I think she's looking at it. And of course, you have to consider Mark Ronchetti. So I think
that's right, because he's got his podcast and lots of followers, and has stayed active in meeting people, because there's a lot of grassroots that still works in New Mexico. And
if I could stir the waters to bring out the best candidate, I'd say everyone should run.
I think it makes it more interesting. I wrote an editorial a few weeks ago, kind of glad that Heinrich had decided to stay in D.C., because I think two big heavyweights can be unpleasant.
Agreed.
But one heavyweight and then other people who test them and make them, no one should get anointed. You should have a tough, good primary. And I think Bregman's, he's a smart man, strong candidate. And I figure you've got other people who have been in statewide office that we can't count out on the Democratic side either. I don't know who they are, but I would bet there's going to be more than two candidates once all is said and done.
Man, consider this. Aren't they applying for a job?
Yes.
Aren't they applying? Why do we wait to get their opinions so late into the game so we can't change horses? I think every one of them should be talking now. I think the debate should be now, even pre-primary. Let Deb Holland talk to Sam Bregman. Let Sam Bregman talk to Ms. Domenici. Have them all talking now.
And talk about your solutions.
Correct.
And that I think one of the things I still like about New Mexico is we keep a lot of the cultural issues out of our campaigns in comparison to the national. You can still be, if you're a Republican, you're going to be pro-life. If you're a Democrat, you're going to be pro-abortion rights, all those kinds of things. But I want to know, if Sam Bregman's running, how is he going to get law enforcement to enforce the law? How is he going to staff the police? And I mean, everybody says they will, but what are your methods to get there?
Inez, you're saying it perfectly. One thing New Mexico's had, we've been around a long time, okay?
Yes, we're old.
That's right. We've been around a long time, but we have a state of great activists.
Yes.
And that sounds great. But an activist spends the entire time pointing out the problems you face. We don't need to point out the problems. They're pretty clear and pretty obvious. We need people who are only going to come up with solutions. That's it.
Yeah.
That's simple.
Yeah, I keep thinking about, the fact that we can't get police to live in Santa Fe, which I spent a lot of time one summer talking to them, and I came to the realization that we had really wonderful men and women on our force. And the reason they didn't live in Santa Fe is not just because it's expensive, which it is, it's because they didn't want to live in Santa Fe. So then you go back to, how do we grow police officers for Santa Fe? And how do we, maybe you don't raise it 10,000, maybe you raise it 30,000. I don't know what the answer is because I'm a thinker about these things, but the politicians, as much as we give them grief, they're the doers and the solvers. So what do you do to fill up people that will do the job that you need them to do?
And the fact is, we need to use our budget correctly. We have enough money. We have the money now to pay law enforcement properly. We have enough money to give law enforcement the resources to carry out the laws we write. But it's not just law enforcement. No. We have so much money. I don't think people realize, do you know what the largest industry in New Mexico is? It's not cannabis. It's not green chili. It's not even law enforcement.
Cons?
Healthcare.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Imagine how many nurses, doctors, community hospitals. So we need to come out and realize we screwed up malpractice. We underpay our teachers. We underpay our nurses. It's time we finally say, okay, let's put the money in the places where we get the biggest bang. Not just talk about it, but actually spend the money. What state employees haven't had a raise in how long?
Yeah.
So it's time for us to quit talking and start doing something different.
On that note, this has been another Conversations Different. We'll be back next week.